Mr. Speaker, I ask to address the House for 1 minute for the purpose of inquiring about next week's schedule.
The gentleman, without objection, but the gentleman will suspend.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Georgia will suspend.
I'm sorry.
Changing chairs.
Oh.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the Speaker, and I yield to the gentleman from Florida for the purpose of announcing next week's schedule.
I thank my good friend from Georgia for yielding. On Monday, the 9th of February, the House will meet at 2 p.m. for legislative business, with votes postponed until 6:30 p.m. On Tuesday, the 10th, the House will meet at 12:30 p.m. for morning hour and 2 p.m. for legislative business. On Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, the House will meet at 10 a.m. for legislative business. We will consider several bills under suspension of the rules. The complete list of suspension bills will be announced by the close of business on Friday. We also expect to consider S-22, the Omnibus Public Land Management Act of 2009, and in addition, pending Senate action on H.R. 1, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. We anticipate House action on that legislation.
Reclaiming my time, the public lands omnibus spending, I want to note for the gentleman that the bill that he has announced for next week, the public lands omnibus bill, is a bill that actually contains 130 separate bills. And it authorizes $10 billion in taxpayer spending. Given our current economy, I would think that Congress should engage in the same belt-tightening that so many Americans, our constituents, are having to do every day. Next week, we will consider almost $1 trillion stimulus and a $10 billion massive lands bill. And at some point in the near future, we are going to have to understand that we are going to have to shrink the amount of spending that we're doing. I'd like to ask the gentleman, will there be a bill on the floor next week to offset at least some of the massive spending the Congress is considering? And I'd yield to the gentleman for a response.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. As the gentleman knows, we're very focused on fiscal discipline, and we're very concerned about our ever-increasing deficits. Now, we look forward to working with Chairman Spratt and our new president on a budget that's going to reduce spending and bring down our deficit, and we look forward to working with the gentleman and his colleagues on fiscal issues in the future. As you well know, among other things, our goal continues to be to find a balance between the need for action during economic crisis with our desire to go through the legislative process. I could go at length with my good friend regarding how we got where we are, but in anticipation of the need to continue the rest of the business of the day, I'll leave it at that and I'll yield back to my friend.
Well, thank you. In reclaiming my time, I'd like to remind the gentleman that, that is a history lesson, and I think the people of our country and our constituents right now are looking to the future and what we're going to be doing in the future. And in particular, the history that you're talking about the past administration or the past Congresses, let me just remind my friend that we're spending about $100 million a minute in this Congress, and so I'm glad to hear that gentleman from Florida, my friend, is aware of the amount of money and the amount of deficit and the amount of debt that we're piling up. And I'd like to remind the gentleman also that just down the road we will be considering a $410 billion omnibus spending bill and likely another supplemental of the amount of work that was not done in the last Congress about coming up with these appropriation bills, and we're having to do it in one bundle, and I think the American people certainly have a concern about that spending. But let me comment on something that my friend from Florida said, and that was the bipartisanship here. And like our new president, your fellow Democrats in Congress and you have often spoken optimistically about bipartisanship and about including Republican ideas in the stimulus. But I'd like to remind my friend that only 4% of Republican ideas were even considered on the floor of this House, the People's House, a house for open debate about such issues, especially of the importance of the type of spending that we've been doing. And of the few Republican amendments adopted in committee, the majority of those were either dropped or altered before the bill ever got to the floor. And to me, that's not acting in a spirit of bipartisanship. And worse yet, the Speaker is yet to meet with the Republicans to hear ideas. President Obama has had about 3 meetings with our leadership and listening to our ideas, but yet the Speaker of this body, the body that we're a part of, has not even met with Republicans yet to get some ideas. So you've announced that we're moving the convening time next week from Tuesday to Monday, and this will ensure that negotiations on $1 trillion spending bill occurs while most members are not even going to be in town. I'd like to ask the gentleman what opportunities will Republicans be given next week or any time in the future, but especially next week, to increase tax relief in the bill and cut wasteful spending before the stimulus is voted on again. And I yield to my friend from Florida, Francis.
The gentleman has raised 2 issues at least that I thank him for yielding and giving me an opportunity to express the views of the leadership. As I said before, our goals continue to be to find a balance between the need for action while we have this economic crisis and our desire to go through the legislative process. The leadership has urged our colleagues in the other body to complete action on the recovery bill in a timely fashion, even if it means they have to work through the weekend. In addition, we've scheduled an additional day, as you point to, of legislative business next week so we can begin the process of conferencing with the Senate. Also, I would remind the gentleman that the Appropriations, Ways and Means, and Energy and Commerce Committees all held full markups. Per the gentleman's request during our last colloquy, the Rules Committee, as I'm sure the gentleman knows that I'm privileged and honored to serve on, waived pay-go points of order and made a Republican substitute in order. In addition, Chairwoman Slaughter of the Rules Committee put out a call for amendments. Speaking of bipartisanship, there was an evenly balanced number, at least 6-5. There were 6 Democratic amendments made in order, 4 Republican amendments, and 1 bipartisan amendment were considered last week on the floor. Now, we're going to continue to listen to Republican ideas throughout the conference process and look forward to working with the gentleman and his colleagues.
And I reclaim my time, and I'd just like to say to the gentleman, I know that there was over 200 amendments offered, which
206.
210 amendments offered, and about 95 of those were Republican. And so if I'm hearing the gentleman correctly, and I'll yield for an answer, only 4 of those were worth having a vote on the floor?
No, as I indicated to my friend, thank you for yielding, as I indicated to you, there were substantial markups. For example, the Appropriations Committee met for over 8 hours. And Republicans as well as Democrats had an opportunity to offer their amendments. You understand and your colleagues understand the process, and I can make this anecdotal and personal. My amendment was not made in order, and I serve on the Rules Committee. I would hope that the gentleman would understand the dynamics of the process. I yield to the gentleman.
In reclaiming my time, and I certainly do understand that in the rules process that you also patiently sit in, but I also understand the committee process and the part of process that the American people expect us to go through, and these bills did go through Ways and Means, and I know the Energy and Commerce, but I do know that in the Energy and Commerce Committee there were several amendments voted on in Energy and Commerce that were Republican amendments that passed. and that the amendments were stripped out of the bill before it ever got to the Rules Committee, before it ever got to the floor. And I'd love to yield to the gentleman to see if he has some type of recollection that did happen, and to find out how these things got taken out of a bill that was passed through that committee.
I certainly am, if the gentleman will yield.
I'll yield.
I am certainly not aware of that, and I speak constantly with the majority leader, and I'm not of the mind that the majority leader is aware either.
Well, reclaiming my time, I would hope that my friend would check into that for me, and maybe if we have these colloquy again, we can do that. And let me say that I'd like to tell the gentleman that where the president has set an example, the congressional Democrats have not really followed that as far as acting bipartisan. And one last question that I'd yield to the gentleman for an answer is, you mentioned that there would be a conference on H.R. 1 if it comes back from the Senate this weekend, perhaps. I don't know if the other body's going to work this weekend or not. But let's say they do, and there's a conference that's set up for Monday on H.R. 1. Are there going to be any Republicans included in that conference committee?
As is always the case, first coming from the other body, as you well know, they're in the process now of dealing with a substantial number of amendments that are being offered by Republicans and Democrats. I can't speak to the conferencing numbers and to its breakdown, as it were. What I do know is that a conference is going to be scheduled, and on yesterday, I personally visited members of the Senate, and I have it on good information that they are going to work through a substantial portion of the weekend, and I suspect that those committees, that the committees of germane jurisdiction will contemplate the ideas of Republicans and Democrats in the conference.
Well, reclaiming my time, but could the gentleman just tell me if there will be one Republican on the conference committee?
I cannot speak for those that are the chairs and or the appointment of members of the conference committee.
Well, reclaiming my time, I hope that our leadership in this House would work in a bipartisan manner, and even though we've been shut out of the process so far, if there is a conference committee, that we would at least be included. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the gentleman from Florida, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman has yielded back the balance of his time.
Mr. Speaker?
For what purpose does the gentleman rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns on Monday next, it adjourn to meet at 12:30 p.m. on Tuesday, February 10th, for morning hour debate.
Without objection, so ordered.